Welcome to the Resilient Campus Podcast, amplifying the voices of college inclusion innovators. I'm your host, Sabby Labor, founder and CEO of Resilient Campus. Join me each week as I interview professionals on the front lines of campus and community movement building. For more information, please visit resilientcampus.com/podcast. This is episode number 10 of the Resilient Campus podcast. Today we're speaking with Jessica Pettitt, author and speaker with Good Enough Now. Jessica Pettitt, M.Ed, CSP, pulls together her stand-up comedy years with 15 plus years of diversity trainings in a wide range of organizations to serve groups to move from abstract fears to actionable habits that lead teams to want to work together. With a sense of belonging and understanding, colleagues take more risks with their ideation, converse precious resources through collaboration, and maintain real connections with clients over time. Thanks so much, Jessica, for being here with me today. How are you?
I am doing really great. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm super excited to have you on. I think that I have mainly become aware of your work through LinkedIn. So we're both kind of laughing about like, yay, LinkedIn. The work that we're putting onto social media via LinkedIn is actually having an impact because I've been able to watch for all the resources that you put out there and really learn and grow with the education that you're doing. So I really appreciate the work that you're engaged in, and I'm so glad that we get to talk to each other today.
Absolutely. And LinkedIn specifically, I'm proud of myself that I know how to log in. So the idea that these social media platforms can seem so like either trivial or not of focus, etc., and can also be resources to make connections like this really kind of proves they work. So just go log in.
Absolutely, yeah. Just go log in. LinkedIn will do the rest.
Right.
Good. Well, and I know that biography is a little more, centered on the work, the tangibles that you are delivering to individuals and organizations. Tell us a little bit more about yourself. What do you want folks listening in to know about you?
Oh, I don't like long walks on the beach, and yet live on one. That's the quintessential moment of my life. I worked in higher ed for about 10 years and continually got fired, which could be kind of an interesting thing for us to dive into. I would have jobs working with or supporting marginalized or silenced populations on campus. I was very often the person who was brought to campus to kind of squelch the angry, we need this. And then I would come, but there was no anticipation generally of me actually doing any kind of work or being visible in any way, which is really not a good match for my personality. And then I would do a bunch of work, and then I was as disposable as the work because you can't get rid of the students, if that makes any sense. And so after my third firing, I decided I needed to kind of create some kind of backup plan, 3 times as a pattern. So I started my own speaking and consulting business kind of on the side, which if we're going to go the social media route, at the time Facebook was brand new and you had to have EDU addresses in order to use it, but that was instrumental in getting my consulting business kind of up and going. And now it's been over a decade. So Fantastic. That's me.
That is wonderful. And Jessica, which identities are most salient for you today? What are those that remain kind of prominent or rise to the surface on a daily basis for you?
So many, and this is a short podcast. I would say I am a white, cisgender woman, highly educated, as opposite from a first-generation college student as possible, raised upper class, and now probably living upper middle, lower upper, depending on kind of what your graph says as far as my class experience goes. I'm legally married, which as a queer person is a strange reality that is constantly coming up. And I'm 43, which means I'm like young and hip in some crowds and an aging dinosaur in others. So I think those are my most salient ones today.
Great. And what pronouns are you using today?
Feminine, she, her. Perfect.
Awesome.
Thank you.
And tell us about the work that you're doing today. I know that I have a very small sort of sampling of your work, and I know that you're doing much broader projects and initiatives that LinkedIn is telling me about. So tell us about that work that you're doing today to innovate around inclusion topics.
Sure. So I would say that I have been a diversity and social justice educator, trainer for a better part of a decade. And about 3 years ago, I was finding myself burnt out, exhausted, not really making a difference, and was either going to quit or figure something out. About 3 years ago, I decided to see if I could figure something out, and in doing that, really flipped my own work inside out. I wrote a book. It was published in July. I also have been working a lot more with associations than college campuses, largely because they have exactly the same problems and are nurturing, for lack of better words, employers and employees all over the country in a way that I feel has not had access to really solid, equitable, advocacy-based social justice training. So the last 3 years have been kind of a big switch on every level.
And it sounds like you're working with a lot of employee engagement issues. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, I think that kind of everything I'm doing right now is really Trojan horsey. And so what that kind of has meant is that if I come in as an employee engagement speaker, the wrong people show up. If I come in as a diversity speaker, the wrong people show up. And so I have really been leaning on my stand-up comedy background. I just wrote a book that's kind of a subliminal diversity training disguised as a communication training, and then coming in as this like funny ha-ha-ha, oh, wow, we're learning something kind of approach, which has been rejuvenating for me, and it's seemingly more effective for everybody else as well.
So tell me more about how the use of humor either promotes or inhibits the type of inclusion conversations that you're trying to engage folks in. Like how has that worked effectively, and sort of what are the limitations of that? Because it's interesting, this strategy of humor. I was having a conversation with someone just this week about sort of improv, about public policy issues, and really intrigued by this. So can you tell me a little bit more about why humor does work or doesn't work in certain areas or sectors?
Sure. I feel like I should start with it doesn't work, just because when it doesn't work, it's really bad. And it doesn't take more humor to get you out of a situation when humor doesn't work. But with that said, if you can practice stories or observations or things like that in places where the risks are a lot lower, then you can actually create stand-up routines, shtick stories, etc., examples that really do drill home the actual feelings that we get when we're trying to avoid an awkward conversation or a difficult topic or a challenging situation. All of us have been in those. So when I did stand-up back in the day, most of what I did was just around politics. But what makes it funny is that everyone in the audience or who's listening has a similar experience or similar feeling to the self-deprecating story. And I bring that to diversity and social justice work in a way that everyone in the audience also, certain people in your life are close enough that you can tell them their flies down, they got spinach in their teeth, it's no big deal. But you change that person out to someone else and you don't even know how to give them a compliment. So that kind of awkwardness to me is fertile ground for my sense of humor, but I think also having 20 years of research and history and backup on adult learning, crisis management, social justice icon research specifically, as well as my ongoing obsession with politics, I think it's kind of a Venn diagram that tends to be powerful.
Interesting.
I don't necessarily recommend kids try this at home.
There's like a warning label around the comedy work.
I don't know why it works for me. Careful. Yeah.
And tell us about sort of how you arrived to this work that you're doing today. It sounds like you're writing, you're consulting, you're doing a lot of different important forms of the work. So tell us about that kind of journey arriving to today.
Well, I started a little bit when getting fired really is what brought me here. I knew what I wanted to do, and I just couldn't find the right space to do it. So, even back in the day when I taught high school, I think I was a pretty good high school teacher. I think I was young and naive, but I didn't want to be limited by state requirements or district-approved curriculums. Parents tend to be far more protective and worried of their students than I felt was necessary. And so I felt like I was doing really good work, and the language I use is ill-fitting Spanx. So, you can figure out a way to make it work, but, why? So I just kind of kept bumbling around in different facets of what I would call education, and until eventually I found a place where I could just I didn't get like better fitting Spanx. I just got to take them off and like just myself. So
yeah, it was just so interesting that you're hitting on these conversation points that I've had this week about the constraints that some of these higher education institutional structures put on social justice and inclusion work, and how I haven't really found a fit within how we silo the work sometimes, and it doesn't allow for intersectional work. And so I'm really glad that you added voice to that, just because it's sometimes I feel a little paranoid. Am I the only one that doesn't feel like they fit entirely into
Can't be the only one. My personal favorite, this just happened this week, where I was working with a client to potentially put together a contract for like a year-long retainer, which would be great. And, it was all good, and gave him videos and information and links and, things that I typically do. And she emailed back and said, we gave this all to the board and to the decision-making committee, and they really, really love your work. They're really into it. They really get it. But it's really more social justice based. Do you have anything that's just diversity based?
Oh, interesting.
And I was like, nope, sure don't. And she's like, I don't understand. Like, how do you, because I wrote back really quickly, and we'd had a good rapport, et cetera, and you're probably not supposed to really just be that honest. But I am. And I explained that, to me, this is the vernacular problem that leads to my job security, right? So this is the work that I do. If you want to call it cultural competency, or you want to call it diversity, or you want to call it social justice, great. I call it taking responsibility to try to make the world better. That scares people, so you can call it whatever you want to, but I can't shift it back to the 1900s to use really old definitions of things, because that's where, in this particular case, the members of the decision-making committee, they had gone to conferences and trainings, much like I have, and were still kind of imbibed, is that the right word, in really bad diversity language that isn't intersectional, and it doesn't take into consideration a whole person, and it still uses marginalized or silenced identities as the learning tool for the privileged dominant identities in the room. I'm not doing that anymore. And I take full responsibility that I for sure did that, absolutely, and I'm not going to do it anymore. I probably still accidentally do it occasionally, but certainly not consciously as the backbone of my training.
Yeah.
We ended up having this amazing conversation, and she's like, oh, what you're talking about sounds different. And I'm like, yeah, it works. That's the biggest difference. And so she went on a limb. She's going to do this job instead of that job because it might just work.
Yeah.
I don't know very many people who are egotistical or arrogant or secure enough to just be that honest. That I really thought that I was just going to lose that gig. I recommended 4 or 5 other people and wished them good luck.
I think there's something that I keep waiting to happen, and I'm not sure how exactly to be involved more directly in making sure that it happens, but I was at a diversity conference, and this organization is charged with certifying chief diversity officers, or certifying one of the 2 credentialed programs in which CDOs are their professionalized body of knowledge, and looking at their curriculum and realizing, just having this deep epiphany, almost like palm to forehead, of realizing, oh, this has been kind of the impetus of a lot of the frustration that I've had around this similar vernacular conversation that you brought up around diversity versus social justice work, and some of these ways that we water down the language and the concepts and the work so that we don't actually have to be accountable for a whole lot, and that we don't have to act and go deep and see that we are part of these systems and that we can stop them or address them. And I was just like, oh, this makes total sense, because the curriculum that they're being trained into, it has really no transgender inclusion topics, really no radical awareness of critical race. And it was just here's content, just memorize it so you can take this test and be certified. And the content itself was just really watered down. There were some great frameworks, I think, but the actual information about communities was just reinforcing these very siloed single identity structures. And I was like, oh my God, this is it. This is one of the roots of the issues addressing some of my frustrations with even folks in some of these chief diversity roles, where this is how some of these folks are arriving to the work, because they're not even encouraged to do the critical self-reflection at a very basic level.
And if the first, observation step 1, right? And observation number 2 is it's people like me who have created this system. So when when the trainers or the curriculum developers, etc., don't understand the difference between one's safety and one's sense of comfort, then you're going to design a training or curriculum that's so open-ended that it could potentially apply to anyone on how to be nice to them. And then, like, the addendum of the curriculum are these super, super, super generalized stereotypes of, like, how to treat an entire culture. So, like, as long as you know, don't look at any Asian person in the eye, then you'll have a successful communication. The audacity to say something like that is so racist and so sterilized and generalized for the cost of the person doing the, quote, good work to not be uncomfortable, you're supporting the wrong person. You're protecting the person who's trying to do diversity training versus the person you're trying to advocate for in your diversity trainings. We created that. Same thing goes with, like, LGBT ally trainings. How many safe zone trainings have I done where step one was, here are some definitions, and then got really defensive when people would say, like, well, what does this word mean? Or why isn't this word in the list? I'd never heard of the word before. At what point as educators can we get comfortable with the fact that there's a lot of stuff we don't know? As soon as that kind of started happening, I think my work flipped into actually working with who you're at. Who you are, and then I say who you're at not to make a grammar mistake, but like who you are right now, where you are at right now is the best tool you have to work with. And for the vast majority of us, that is terribly disappointing because we are delicious sacks of hot mess. And that doesn't reduce the truth that, like, my lived experience is still the best tool I have to work with. It's just really sad.
It sounds like you've done a fair amount of writing. You listen to a lot of podcasts. Before we got on this call, we were kind of talking about downloading them in mass. And I'd love for you to recommend, and sometimes it's hard to pick just one, but if there are a couple or one, however you feel best leaning into this, but if there's a book, a podcast, or a resource that really informs the way that you approach your work or that you think about your work today, what would you share with people listening in?
Well, I appreciate the question because that makes me just want to listen to all of your episodes. What I try to do, I try to, like, beautiful mind myself. And I'm making a visual reference to a scene in the movie Beautiful Mind where there's, like, sheets of paper all over a room with pictures and yarn connecting them all. So I try really hard to immerse myself in very odd, disconnected sources of information so that I can provide space for me to make the connection. Of course, I feel like it's in the bylaws. I have to watch Rachel Maddow, and I do. But Rachel Maddow makes really big connections across things, and often I feel like it's very obvious, even though I'm like the captain of the Rachel Maddow fan club, that her own bias can get in her own way as far as the bit of the connections that she focuses on. So I try and watch her and ask, what is she missing? What isn't she paying attention to? What are some other reasons that something could be happening? So that kind of keeps it going. I just stumbled into a new one. Megan Bissell and Josh Packert do a bias disruption podcast. I think there are 6 episodes in so far. Josh is a Dr. Josh Packert. He's a sociology professor in Northern Colorado, and Megan works as the content architect for an ethics forum that they have there. And it is 20 minutes long. What did you read this week? What's caught your attention? And then it's a very interesting thing that, like, they could be talking about New Belgium beer brewery going national. That's not connected to anything I'm specifically doing. However, it's enough information to kind of connect into something else that I'm doing. That isn't it interesting that Elon Musk has offered to rebuild the infrastructural system within Puerto Rico as kind of a test pilot to see if he can even do it. They seem completely disjointed situations, and it's rooted in business, which I usually try to kind of steer away from because I'm an entrepreneur that is an anti-capitalist that understands capitalism. But I guess those are kind of the pieces that come up first. And then I also mentioned Everyday Mindfulness with Mike Domish, who is another speaker who works with the Safe Dating Project. I think I'm messing that title up. But he works specifically around consent, and then kind of as a side thing, really started this podcast on everyday mindfulness interviewing people on just how do you take a second. And that's particularly interesting right now as I'm overstimulating myself with all these things that are unrelated to then also like pause and black everything out so that I can then do nothing. And then I begin to see more connections.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot in there on what you just said. Before I forget, I wonder if you might be open to sharing a little bit more about the month of November and Facebook for you. So in kind of connecting these moments of like overstimulation in our society, I don't know if you're open to sharing like why you're doing it and just give people a little bit more information about like what you're doing.
I know, it would sound so dramatic, right? Like the buildup. Oh my gosh, what is she doing in November? My partner posted a video on Facebook that was a very funny video about a woman who starts dating a guy who's not on social media at all. And the whole video is like, does he even exist? Because he doesn't have an internet footprint. What's funny about it is like the girl in the video is like, how will I know what he ate for lunch? Oh my gosh, unless I ask him. And it's all made like a horror film. So it is very funny. And then it dawned on me, I'm not even kidding. I kind of broke out in hives with the idea of not being on social media. And like you found me on LinkedIn, which I don't feel super engaged with. I mean, I try, but I Facebook every 3 minutes. I'm on Facebook. I know some people prefer Twitter. I do not do Instagram, and I do not do Pinterest or the Snapchats or whatever. Like, I've picked my 3. And in November, all I'm planning on doing is not logging into Facebook. Mm-hmm. That's it. So whatever's automatically scheduled to like tweet or Facebook or whatever, like my assistant repurposes my blogs and like does things like that. Those things will still happen, but I am not logging in for the entire month of November, which should not sound like I'm giving up like dairy or something, right? Like as someone who like lives on cheese and milkshakes, I would love to be able to give up dairy. I don't want to invest in that level of willpower. It's insane to me that that even seems comparable to not logging in to an app. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? Like, I didn't even have a smartphone until just a couple of years ago, maybe, and so I don't understand, which is exactly why I'm doing it. I think another thing, I didn't mention this at our pre-talk, but I went on vacation with my partner this summer. We were completely off the grid for like 3 weeks, and we came back, and for those of you that are paying attention, just to give you some time frames, this was in July. So while we were gone, Sean Spicer either was quit or fired, and then was replaced with some Scaramucci, somebody who then was either quit or fired. And then Reince Priebus was also fired or quit during this period of time. So as someone who's obsessed with politics, like that's big news. That is big stuff that I need to know about. But what's so fascinating is that there's so many big news and distraction every day that, number one, no one felt the need to tell me about it. And then when I came back, it wasn't involved in anybody's recap because the next flaming dumpster had already rolled down the street. So like part of my like, is that I'm going to miss something. And there's a privilege connected to like, if it's important enough, somebody will tell me. But I also think we live in a day and age where like, oh my gosh, I just used the term day and age. I'm officially old. But we live in the day and age where every day is some new dumpster fire for like clicks and attention. And I'm really curious, like what's going to happen in one random month. Notice, like my partner posted this video like right at the beginning of October, so I have like almost a month headway into deciding to do this. Because I need, prep
right.
So if I don't do it in November, one, am I really going to get that disconnected? Probably not. 2, I'm doing a ton of work during that period of time. Am I going to like miss clients? Am I going to miss things? How much of my time in my job is actually dependent on this thing? Not to mention like time I waste at gates waiting for planes or things like this. Like, is there something else I should be doing with my life? I think it's similar to when I finally got my Fitbit, which of course I don't wear anymore, but I had one for a while. And I was convinced that I move a lot until I had a thing that counted. And then it was like, oh, wow, I sit in a chair a lot. But I didn't know that, right? So, yes, my big personal growth is to not log into Facebook in November.
That's fantastic.
It's pathetic.
Well, I can't remember where I was. Well, it's interesting because, okay, so Sinclair Caesar did a similar thing, and he has been on the show. He kind of did like some journaling about it, and really, he's a really active email listserv entrepreneur. And I really appreciate him because he's always sending out positive messages. And I just remember like really admiring him for taking a pause on social media. One, because I got the sense that he is so active on it, and it's a major part of how he has impact. And in today's email software abilities, right? Like we can send out automatic messages and not be anywhere near a computer or a phone. We could just schedule those out. And so just in this kind of strange age where we're constantly connected and have access to each other in very superficial ways, but people are also reporting that we're in this time of having the least authentic connections to other human beings in real life that we've seen in generations.
How will I know what he had for lunch? Ask him.
So there's just such a paradox there that is like just so fascinating.
How do I find out about his ex?
Right. So there was a lot that you mentioned too about making these sort of, and disparate is a word that comes to mind for me, but seemingly disparate bodies of knowledge and information and perspectives. And that was one of the reasons that I started this podcast was currently just more and more being aware that the models of practice that other organizations and other leaders are implementing in grassroots organizing, in sometimes even in corporate spheres too, like some of the practices that they're able to resource and put forth, and then just acknowledging community leaders doing social justice work, trying to bring those perspectives together is something that is interesting to me and I think will inform our work. But the other thing is, some people know that I just finished my dissertation, and I was telling a friend, I was just telling a friend yesterday that was, I finished it in July. Now I'm able to actually think really clearly about the connections, listening to Brene Brown and her talk about empathy and people being in pain and it coming out as hate and divisiveness. And I'm like, yes, we need to connect this to student retention work, to social justice work. And now I feel like, that going back to your beautiful mind scenario, I feel like the string is really connecting to all these sort of seemingly disparate bodies of knowledge, but they could definitely enhance the work that we're doing if we're able to spend the time connecting them. So I'm just like so grateful to be able to digest information now that isn't related, that isn't required.
Yeah. One of my favorite social justice quotes is Frances Kendall: every system is exquisitely designed to produce the results it gets. As someone who grew up with all of my grandparents had PhDs, that's what I'm the opposite of a first-generation college student. I grew up in a family where higher education was how you contributed back to society. And it was your moral obligation and responsibility to your fellow community members to develop an idea that you could contribute some kind of new thinking. And I recognize that is just dripping, candy-filled, and fudge-covered privilege as far as education access goes. But what I find amazing about the exquisitely designed system of higher education is, first off, not everybody has access to it. Number two, it becomes more and more and more and more elite and time-consuming and soul-killing to actually get through the process. So by the time people are done with dissertations, whatever it is they cared about at some point in time has been so extinguished that they're just trying to get done. Mm-hmm. And then they kind of wake up and realize, oh, I have an idea. I care about something again. Oh my gosh, am I leisure reading? What is happening? But the process itself has taught people the painstaking lessons of what it means to make completely random connections or to see things going together in a way that no one around you does. The echo chamber is what are you talking about? That's insane. That's when you're actually on track for something, and I don't know that a lot of people get to that place as an exquisitely designed system, because thinking that independently and making that many connections, what would happen to our economic system if people realized what's really going on? I remember when my first professional job, I was a hall director, and after the other hall director, Pete, and I, who were still really good friends, we were on our second jobs. We called each other once, and we're like, what are you doing? And they were like, he goes, you're never going to guess. And I was like, oh, that's why I'm calling you. You're never going to guess what I'm doing. And we were laying on a couch on our respective couches on a Sunday and had just finished the Sunday paper. And that was 20-something years ago now. And what's fascinating to me is, what does that say about higher education? That your first professional position, which is already kind of like boot camp, right? Because if you haven't been a hall director, then I think people have a hard time feeling like you're competent. But if you have, they just assume you've done everything, like bomb squad's not going to ruffle you. And we had to interview for that job in clothes that we would never wear again in that job. And then at the end of the round one of job, when you have a different job, a Sunday feels luxurious. And I don't know that that is outdated information. I think that is probably how somebody who just finished being a hall director and is now like 2 or 3 months into their first semester of a different job that wasn't on call 24/7, I think they would be able to identify with the luxuriousness of a Sunday.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
What is wrong with us? Why would we do that?
Yeah, I'm thinking back to my residential life days. Yes, I concur. It's enough said, I think.
I'm self-employed, so I can say all kinds of things about my past employers.
Right. Yeah. We're going to switch gears a little bit here, and I'd love to ask you this very big question about what has been the biggest lesson that you've learned in your professional life.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I even knew this one was coming, and you're right. It does feel big when it comes. What I typically say when I'm talking to other consultants or people who are creating their own side hustle is the best thing I've learned, which I don't even know if it's a piece of advice, but the best thing I've learned is that you are in control of your own sense of urgency. And maybe this applies to a real job, but I haven't had one in so long I don't know. But what I mean is that everything feels like a number one priority because often it is. Do you work on your content or your marketing? Yes, that's what you do. But you what about my bookkeeping? Should I prepare for taxes? Don't forget that because April is a-coming. Okay, but what about maintaining relationships with past clients? Yep, you have to do that. What about foresting around and looking for potential leads? Yep, you're going to need to do that. Or to stay relevant, I need to be all over social media and writing articles and thinking and making these connections publicly. Yep, sure need to do that. Oh, and if you actually are doing this job, you also need to be in the right state with a bra on at the right time, chasing airplanes and actually delivering the content you're contracted to do. Yep, sure need to do that. Well, what about invoicing, making sure you get paid? Yep, you need to do that. All of those things are number one priority. So
yes,
there is nothing about owning your own business that I think doesn't involve sitting in a fetal position sucking your thumb at some point in time, which may also be another number one priority. Your job is to be in charge of your own sense of urgency. Today, I maybe am going to do one of these number one things. That is better than zero. Sweet. Maybe tomorrow I will get to another one. More realistically, I will probably finish the one I'm trying to start today. Great. If I had learned that earlier, I would have saved money. I would have trusted my gut instincts instead of trusting people that wanted my money to do something that was going to make me money. There's several of those instances where I just was like, this feels weird, but it felt urgent. So I didn't trust myself because of that. I have to do it. Jessica, shut up. You're just getting in your own way again. Sometimes that's actually for good. Anyway, that's a very long answer. But that'd be my number one piece, I think.
No, I love it because, one, I am laughing really nervously because you're describing my daily struggle with trying not to be overwhelmed with all that is involved in running a business, running an organization. And one of the biggest questions that I get from higher ed professionals when they know that I created this organization is, how can I do that too?
Yeah.
And so I appreciate you sharing that.
Yeah, absolutely. And today is a perfect example, right? So I slept well. I'm at home. Hallelujah. I did some laundry. I had big plans for today. Big plans. So I'm going to wake up, and then I'm currently rewriting the copy. This is such a good example. I'm rewriting the copy on my brand new website that launched in July to be paired with my new book that I had not had time to actually click through on my own website until last month.
Yeah.
So then the stuff that I wrote for July, now I'm like, oh, I don't like it, or it's misspelled or whatever, so I need some edits. So my goal today was to sit down and look at the edits and figure out the copy that I need to rewrite, which I've actually written down like 16 times. Instead of writing it, I just rewrite the to-do list. Write the copy that's missing so that it can actually get up there. That is what I'm going to do today. Yeah. So in reality, what happened is, number one, my dog ate my trash, so I had to pick up envelope bits from all over the house. Then that made me notice, oh, wow, I really need to vacuum. And instead of vacuuming, I changed the sheets. Then I sit back down on my desk, and my husband is at a conference right now and is finishing up the paper that he's presenting tomorrow, and messaged me, can I find this book? In this chapter, there is a sentence that's something about this. So then that was fun, because then I had to go find a book and find the chapter and find the sentence, and I did, so I win. So then I had to get that to him. Then my web guy, who's actually making these changes, waiting for my copy, is sending me edits. So as I'm trying to get through those, I realized that because of the fires, and for me, Southern California, have messed up our phone lines and our internet, the phone and the internet all go out. So I'm like, oh, well, this would be a really perfect time to write. Again, hashtag no Facebook in November. Because instead of no shave November, it's no Facebook in November. So I have no internet and I have no landline. I should write. Wouldn't that be perfect? I should do this, except I remember I have a hotspot on my cell phone. So then I go through all of the emails that are still in my inbox looking for you and your phone number to tell you that the phone line might not work. And then the next thing I know, it's noon. Yeah, my day started at 4 a.m.
Yeah. But let's talk about the bigger picture, right? Because I get this from folks who, they're like, yeah, I want that day. I want to just like be around my home. And I'm like, okay, well, look at me maybe that week later on, Saturday or Sunday, when our higher ed folks who are not in residential life might have the days off. They're totally relaxing, doing their own thing. And I might choose to work because I took Monday off, or I took Monday and Friday off, right? Like I already had my sort of weekend days, and I might take another, but depending on all those things that you said, like that are constantly battling for our attention and have a sense of urgency, it's like, okay, well, I definitely need to get my website redesign up. That's going to need to be my Saturday. I need to just kind of lock myself in my home office and do that. So I think that's the picture that other people may not have, is that, yeah, because we work from home, like we can do these things at home, and that does push itself into other time of our week sometimes. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, and then you also have to layer in like the humanness, the Me Too hashtag, or the I Have hashtag, which, by the way, I keep trying to say this. Me Too started 11 years ago. It was not Alyssa Milano. Thank you very much. But those hashtags started while I was out on the road, and, I was happy to participate, and I even tried to do one of those Twitter things where you, like, put tweets back to back to back to back to back, and there was a typo in it. I'm trying to not lose sleep over that, because new and new are the same word, just one is accurate in that sentence. Anyway, did all of that, and then did I plan on what it would be like when all my social media outlets are reminding me of my own experiences of sexualized violence and sexualized harassment, and my clients don't care, right? I mean, I'm sure they care, but they really paid me to be a funny MC, or they paid me to do a 6-hour training. So suck it up, figure it out, right? So then as soon as you're off the clock again and back in your hotel room, my to-do list says I'm supposed to be working on this same copy that I still haven't done, and I can't. I don't have anything left because I just had to compartmentalize my life to such a degree to satisfy a client requirement, because big picture, the work I'm doing actually matters and does circle back to Me Too and I Have. And then when it's all done, I then just get to sit in my own lack of mental health and not do my to-do list. I mean, now at least I'm home. I have clean sheets on the bed, and my dog, who continually goes through my garbage can, is adorable. Luckily, I don't have to send him to college.
Okay, I mean, I see so you added humor there at the end of a very difficult conversation point. So oh
my gosh, it's like a defense mechanism or something.
I mean, your experience, your words, right? I appreciate you sharing all that. I had a student that shared a similar experience with the Me Too hashtag last night, and I just want to be conscious that you're sharing something really vulnerable with us, and I just want to honor that and kind of pause for a second to thank you for sharing that. And I know that even just within this week, I've already encountered one person who would really appreciate hearing that is not only impacting them, but is impacting other people. So thank you for sharing that.
Well, I appreciate that. And if I can, I'm not going to make a joke because you're right, it's serious and I need to take myself seriously sometimes too. When I was talking about the beautiful mind thing, what is also interesting is that as Me Too and I Have were happening, then I Believe You started. And then what was so fascinating about I Believe You was one particular instance was a trans guy that I know posted up, I have Me Too and I have done this. I have also objectified women and done this as well as I was learning how to navigate my own sense of masculinity as a man. I have done all three of these. And I believe you. And I wrote back to my trans friend and said, as a woman and as a cis woman, I just want to let you know that I believe you too. I'm holding your super complicated truths, all facets of this particular topic. I believe you too. Wouldn't it be powerful if we just believed each other's stories? That's what I mean by kind of making all these interesting connections, is that from sexual harassment and sexualized violence also comes the privileged identities that come of being a cisgender woman. That then led the floodgates open for people talking about their experiences in trying to be the gender they were assigned and their experiences of learning to be the gender that other people would believe or perceive or pass, and what that's really like. And it all comes back to policing identities. And look, here we are. Now I'm back at work. And then I get all excited again, and I'm all back to motivated. And then maybe after this podcast, I will actually write that copy for my website.
Well, I mean, just as someone that reads your posts, because I think LinkedIn just posts a little blurb of your blog posts, I'm excited to read it. So
yeah.
If that helps. Sinclair Caesar. So funny story about Sinclair and I that relates to this is that we haven't met in person yet, but I am a huge fan of Sinclair and we were connected by a mutual person. And our first hey, let's get to know each other conversation sometime about a year ago, Sinclair was telling me, coaching me in our first 30 minutes of knowing each other and saying that, I was having a hard time putting out blog content and just feeling like I had anything valid to say. I mean, one, because that's imposter syndrome at its worst. And two, because we have such a call out culture and a throwaway culture, especially within social justice work, that you make a tiny mistake and you're out. People, sever you from their social media or call you out and just, in inflammatory ways that aren't really productive or that aren't in community. And Sinclair told me something, and I'm sure that he would say it better than I'm going to rephrase it, but it was something to the effect of people need to know what you have to say. They're going to gain value from the work that you're doing. So if that helps you when you have that writer's block, or that you have, other things prioritize themselves over getting that writing, getting that information, that perspective out, he told me, just get over yourself. He literally told me this in the first 30 minutes of us knowing each other.
That sounds like a good friend.
It was a good, and that's why we've stayed connected. One of the reasons, just because, I just feel like we need to also be able to be that mirror for each other and to say you're doing great work. I'm excited to read and to learn and to converse with you and be in dialogue with you. Please continue the work that you're doing. Even though the imposter syndrome is you don't have anything to say. Nobody's going to like this. They're not going to like that word that you use. Oh, they're going to scrap that up. They're going to shred that thought. You'll never recover. Be quiet, imposter syndrome. It's just be quiet for a moment.
Yeah. What's also interesting is from imposter syndrome place, but also group individual place. When I was on this last trip, I was not doing very well, trying to take care of myself, trying to take care of my mental health. So I reached out to a friend of mine really to try and connect, and I recognize the emotional labor of other social justice educators doing this, those that hold different identities of me, etc. And what's fascinating is that in this reach out, I'm assuming they are also exhausted from being on the road. Their response to my reach out was all group membership level, like an arrogant, egotistical white woman who just thinks at any moment this woman of color is going to drop everything and be their counselor. And oh, wow, yes, I can see all of these things on a group membership level and also on an individual level. I really believe that I probably feel somehow after a 20-year friendship, being entitled to that individual space of an individual relationship. I felt I was being vulnerable and sharing this is really what's hard for me and this is where I'm at and I really would like to talk with you. And both of those are true.
Mm-hmm.
Both of those are totally true. Like, it is a sense of entitlement to think that my friend is going to be there when I need to be there, and that I will be there when they need me, and if they need me, they will reach out to me. That is a sense of entitlement. When we are also navigating our individual relationships, which is what made me think of it, like imposter syndrome, I think is kind of an individual piece, but it also has this internalized oppression, group membership thing that can also happen. And when that comes into a conversation or a relationship or an interaction where one is just from group and one is from individual, can be really lonely and a really harmful disconnect that may be unrecoverable. I keep reminding myself as I'm going through this with my friend, but also anyone listening to this, that the work that we're doing is more important than our work, and it has to be done. There are always going to be influences or energies or people or turning points or something that try and convince you to stop doing the work. And that's the whole point of doing the work, is that you just have to keep doing it. Writer's block may be one thing, and I also hear, like, have I experienced enough of a something to have the right to have a voice to say something about it? I think there's individual and group stuff going on in there. So
absolutely. Yeah. Good. And I feel like at least half of the people that have come on to this podcast, and, you know, I haven't been around that long with the podcast to say like, oh, this X number of people, but self-sabotage and like imposter syndrome and these different types of way that we view our own credibility or like value our own content and contributions is something that has come up in very different ways. And I appreciate you're adding a new lens to even think about those ways and the group and the individual kind of dynamics and the interconnections. Or I appreciate you adding that.
Well, happy to help. I may possibly have, at least temporarily or maybe not, lost a friend out of it. And I think it's a really good learning lesson for me and my identities. I need to be... Just because something's vulnerable to me doesn't mean that it's good timing for everyone else.
Absolutely. And so we're going to switch gears just a little bit, but it's related to the biggest lesson that you've learned in your professional life. This one is, you know, imagine that you're speaking kind of one-to-one with other folks that are doing inclusion work today. What is that one piece of guidance that you would give to them so that they can sustain this work? I think that this is a great segue from the comment that you just made about staying in the work and being able to maintain it. Like, what's that piece of guidance that you would give them?
The thing that's up, it's a good question. The thing that's up for me the most for my advice to myself, I mean, in some ways that's like the worst thing about being a keynoter is that you're constantly with this motivational, great storyteller. So you're like, shut up, just suck for a while. Jamie Washington, Dr. Reverend Jamie Washington, who is a friend, and I believe is the first person I heard say this, but in order to do inclusion work or to have inclusive conversations, you must first start with who are we excluding? And when I have asked that question of organizations, I think it's really bad diversity trainings that have taught us, oh, no, we're not excluding anyone. Like, well, of course you are. You couldn't ever have 100% attendance at a program because you don't have a space big enough. So how do you, target market, or who do you assume is going to come? Who do you assume is not going to come? Even starting at that level helps you get a little bit more familiar and comfortable with the idea that you could actively be excluding someone or something. And then, is that a pattern that you're interested in keeping? Is that a pattern that needs to change? And from that, are there people that are being excluded that you haven't even acknowledged as people? Right? That has been a very interesting segue, specifically right now in my work. What I'm finding is people who voted for Trump and people who actively identify as an evangelical Christian or just super Christian in their own words, more so than I've heard in a while, do not feel like they can talk, speak, share, insert their opinions. And partially it's because they feel like if they say they voted for Trump, then they instantly have, a Costco stack of tiki torches in the back of their car and they're waiting to kill people. And when I have used that approach, who are you excluding? I actually get kind of the pink okami liberals in the room to realize who they're not listening to. So then the conversation actually shifts from them, which then makes other people who have been prepared, this is the feedback I'm getting at least, prepared to not even be able to speak, suddenly feel like they have space for their voice.
Yeah. Can we stay there for one moment? Because I feel like this piece around, I've heard this time and time again, this, especially now with this presidential administration, folks on campus feel like if they're Republican, if they are conservative in any way, they voted for Trump. That's been one of the biggest screaming points of today's free speech issues on campus. Have you found strategies that you could share with others around like what people are doing well to engage some of these cross-ideological divides?
I just try to name it, right? Like, let's just go ahead and talk about it. The thing that people have in common right now, and this could potentially make me not a fan favorite, but most of the people I have met who voted for Donald Trump because he was not Hillary Clinton. So anybody who's a fan of Hillary Clinton knows that she's an incredibly divisive figure. I voted for Hillary Clinton because she was not him. I did not vote for her like, yeah, I want Hillary Clinton to be president. That's going to be amazing. That I didn't. And part of it is because I worked with her back in the 1900s, and I actually told her to her face that I would never vote for her for president because she was not nice. She did not appreciate people around her, and I did not like working with her or her general way of treating human beings when she's in a place of power. So fast forward 100 millennium, I voted for her for president because she was not him. It's also important to remember that only a quarter of the registered eligible voters voted in the first place. So if we're going to make politics be that divisive and polarizing, please notice that it's only 1 in 4 people who are even playing your game to begin with. So then that diffuses a lot of this, like, about it, right? Like, there are wackadoodles on both sides of every argument, plus people who are still wackadoodles who don't even know the argument you're having. Take it down a notch. And I say that also from a super place of privilege, but I think that the abject fear that people are literally feeling right now, really endangered and really fear-based, isn't actually horribly new. It's like right now, but it's not new. And I'm not trying to dismiss it or like invalidate it by saying it's not new, but we've dealt with this before and we can do better. Disarming the unspeakable elephants in the room, part of that is just acknowledging that of the people who voted, most of the people have something in common, and that is that they voted for somebody because they weren't somebody else. Well, now we can really critique the democracy that we're in. And by critiquing democracy, we can pay attention to our voice and whose voice matters and whose voice doesn't matter. And how do we get that to shift? Mm-hmm. That's a real conversation about politics, not about whatever dumpster fire is happening in any given moment. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to invalidate that the dumpster fires really do hurt people and really do scare people. And it is also true that a lot of this new legislation stuff isn't sticking. It's just terrifying people, and then it gets ruled unconstitutional or falls away.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I hear you naming a couple of strategies in there. I mean, one is kind of just naming it to begin with, to even open up for those dialogues. And then I think the other piece that I caught that was in there was around trying to locate and really center and build upon those things that are commonalities or common interests or common values, just recognizing that we have things in common when we are seemingly in these divided camps, if you will, or divided schools of thought, these polarizing schools.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I may be messing up this reference, but I think relatively recently, is it Google or was it Amazon that had a new chief diversity officer who is a woman of color and opened up their speech with 20 blue-eyed blonde white guys sitting in a boardroom could actually be a diverse group of people. And it was getting a lot of negative media attention because you're not really supposed to say that. And of course, that's not how we typically define diversity and things like this. But the reality is that she's actually right. A group of people can be diverse and can be diverse in a number of ways that we don't socially weight. And you can have a group of people who all look very, very different from each other, and they actually have a very homogeneous way of living their lives or making decisions or backgrounds. That is also true. It's just not something you're supposed to say.
Well, and I mean, it seems to be, I'm remembering back to why this is such a triggering point for a lot of social justice educators is because you get these, I'm just thinking of this scenario of having a campus interview with someone for maybe an executive level administrator type of position. They're going to oversee a lot of the major components of like student success and student retention. And their answer to the diversity question, quote unquote,
right,
is like,
one.
there's usually one. and their definition sounds something like that. Oh, well, diversity of perspectives or some sort of response that makes you very aware that if it's not that and that people are racially diverse, that this history, you know, the history of the nation has a very real genocide and erasure of culture and people, that like they just stop there. And so
right.
That's such
Absolutely.
a triggering point.
And it is a triggering point. And like the reality is, I mean, even as a super privileged white woman, I can hear myself like listening to this out of context and being like, Jessica, you are not supposed to say those things. So another exquisitely designed system is the interview process. If somebody were to answer what really should be answered, which is probably something like, this is an outdated, stupid question. What I think you're actually trying to get to is this, but no one in the room is comfortable enough to ask. So I'll just answer this question. And then you actually answer it from an intersectional place where you acknowledge your own identities, your own privileges, and possibly disclose your own marginalized or subordinated experiences and how that can or cannot come across in a professional setting, working with students, working with other professional staff, faculty, community, etc. You're not going to get that job, more than likely, because you now sound like an activist, which scares people. Or if you do something that makes anybody in that room feel subpar or not as up on vocabulary, they're going to be threatened or intimidated by you, so you're not going to get that job. So you answer the question to the level of the people in the room who are asking the question, and then hope you get the job, and then see what can happen. And we all know this, that the reason why we have job security is that universities, until they, this is a bold statement, until they stop busing in people who are different than the privileged white group of kids who go to school there so that the privileged white group of kids can have a diverse experience, if that initiative hasn't stopped, then most places of higher education aren't actually institutionally trying to support all of the students who go to school there. So I can get stuck on a system level thing. We can also get stuck on an individual thing, answering that 10 white, blonde, blue-eyed guys can have a diverse background. From a group membership place, that looks false. From an individual place, it could be true. But you can also have a group of different-looking people who actually aren't as diverse, but from a group membership place, they are. Are those people on that committee, let's say, are they able to represent the different perspectives of the lived experiences coming from different group membership? That is putting together an intentional group, which most committees aren't intentionally put together. You're just voluntold or stupid enough to volunteer.
Yes, I've been stupid enough to volunteer many times on those search committees.
And this is just more reason why I can't work at a place every day, right? This is how my brain works. As long as I have a departing flight, people can handle these kind of conversations.
Well, and I think that's something that, you know, we're talking about social media, and I think instantly about attention span, and that we are increasingly unable to handle the complexity of longer relationships, longer term engagement with someone to really learn about and appreciate their complexities and appreciate the fact that we're not going to agree on everything. And that's great. That's kind of the expected idea. I think more and more I run up against this realization that social media and just the way that technology has influenced our shortened attention spans is having these deep impacts on our ability to have real authentic relationships with one another. Even in this work, we don't all need to agree on things. And like, I think there's value when we don't, because what you're saying too is that we're encouraging organizations to have diverse perspectives and to encourage like diversity of group thinking and experiences. And sometimes we don't allow that to even happen with other social justice educators. We're like, oh, we don't agree on this. Let's just part ways.
Yeah, or we get into whose cape is bigger, so we have to roll out our social justice resumes to see who's better, which is why it's so shocking when I reach out to other people who are doing work and I'm like, hi, let's be friends. What kind of work do you do? How can I refer you business? How can we support one another? I'm usually just confronted with, what are you trying to get at? And I'm like, being a nice person. But that's not the default first, because it's weird. It is completely shocking.
Well, and Jamie Peperato and I talked about that a little bit in the last episode, and I appreciate that so many times anti-capitalist sentiments have come up in the podcast because that's a lens that we can find some commonality with around, especially in the fact that we're running businesses, and that a lot of the people that are shaping how we know how to run a business and how we know how to start one is people that are really bought into capitalist frameworks. And so it's, how do we do this by resisting the drive towards capitalist gain? I've approached people, and for the most part, people have been approaching it from a frame of abundance. Yeah, let's work together. I don't think that more work for me means less work for you. I think there's enough work to go around for everyone.
Especially in this area.
Yeah, especially in this area, right? And especially since I think we each are, as lifelong learners, like we're building these skill sets, we're building our capacities. And sometimes I get approached for work and that's not my area. I don't feel like that's my strong suit, and I want to hand that off to someone else that is their strong suit, and they would be a better fit or a better alignment with that project than I would.
Yeah, this is great. So good.
Yes, this is fantastic. I'm loving that we've talked this long, but I'm aware that we're at the end of our interview, and I want to know two things from you. One is I would love for people to be able to connect with you, add you to their network, because you're amazing and you're doing really cool, innovative work. And then tell us that thing that is exciting to you today.
Well, I have a business page on Facebook. My regular Facebook page, evidently you can only have 5,000 connections on Facebook, which I don't understand why that's a thing, but that's a thing, so it's often full. But you can follow me on Facebook. Other than November, I'm pretty active there. Twitter is at Jess Pettitt. I'm trying my best on the Twitters, and I'm trying my best even less on LinkedIn. But those are good places. Jess@goodenoughnow.com is my email address. I'm pretty old school, so that works. I usually give out a texting number as well, just in case anybody ever wants to text anything. The texting number is 202-670-4262. It's a Google Voice number, but you can text me anything you want, and I'm happy to answer it. My warning is that if you ask, I usually answer. So that's really kind of connecting. And then as far as exciting, I believe that this is a very exciting time. And I recognize that this is coming from a number of places of privilege. And personally, I feel like this is a very exciting time in that I don't think we can call most of the people in my life or in my circles apathetic anymore. People are actually starting to care, read, listen, think about things that they may not have done even 2 years ago. And to me, that is mucho exciting. And then if you wanted something super tangible, I would like the record to show that this morning, while my phone and my internet was out, I did actually put my couch cover on correctly the first time.
Okay. That's fantastic. And so another piece that I think people might be curious about, and I just want to congratulate you on that. Like, I don't want to
the couch
let's
cover?
Celebrate.
Oh,
the couch
the struggle
cover.
is
yeah.
real. Yeah, first time.
Celebrate all the small wins.
100% correct, all four corners, first try, first time. Boom.
Okay.
Now I need to write some website copy.
Okay. So tell us about, you mentioned your books. I don't want to leave our episode without letting people know where they can find those. Are they on your website?
They're on the website, goodenoughnow.com, and on the Beast of the Amazon. My newest book that came out in July is called Good Enough Now, and that's the subliminal diversity training disguised as a communication book, which has been wildly popular and also really getting the right people to the table to then have the real diversity conversations that I'm trying to have. And then I guess my parting words, it's actually the subtitle of the book, but it's really how I just keep rolling every day. And that is how to do the best you can with what you have. Some of the time is better than nothing.
I love it. And I love that you provided that as the inspirational quote to send people back out into the world. So for the first time in this podcast, the guest just provided that, and you couldn't have heard it better, folks, from the creator of the quote themselves. So Jessica, thank you so much for being with us today. To all those listening in, thank you so much for all that you do. I truly appreciate you. Stay resilient. Thanks so much for tuning in. Head on over to iTunes, SoundCloud, or Stitcher to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss out on a single episode.